one evening. I was like, oh, 50 is the magic number. Like I could tell that my body was really shifting because I was just not having the bounce back that I once did. I could tell that the weight gain was real and that I was going to have to really make some fundamental shifts in how I was living. And so I decided to kind of take menopause on. I didn't want to suffer and be miserable, and I felt I needed to have more information to overcome the symptoms that I was experiencing. So I began researching everything basically about menopause. Like I learned, things like
Menopause has long been shrouded in secrecy, leaving many clueless, ashamed, and embarrassed to seek and extend support for one of the most natural transitions and rite of passage. Well, the spirit and mood have changed. People are surrendering to curiosity, knowledge, and empowerment. In this podcast, I'll share my own experiences and point of view, peek into the lifestyle and self care practices of people experiencing menopause, and tap experts for their take on the pausal phase. This is for you if you are one of the millions of people in the menopausal phase or want to support them. I'm Dixie Lincoln Nichols, health and well-being educator and wellness founder. This is the Pause Pod. Hey, beautiful people. Welcome back to the Pause Pod. Today, I'm super excited for my guest, Sonya Shields. Sonya and I met several years ago and have been able to maintain a sweet and nourishing friendship. I'm so grateful for her. She has shared with me that her work allows her to be creative and be in service of mission-driven nonprofits focusing on social justice and human rights. Sonia has also shared with me her menopausal journey, tips and tricks that I have found extremely impactful and useful in my life. Sonia, I'm so thankful for you being here. Welcome to the Pause Pod.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It is my pleasure. I love everything that you're doing. I love that you are putting menopause, at the forefront of discussion. Um, and so I'm really happy to share my journey and what I've learned with women.
Wonderful. So, of course, this podcast is about the menopausal journey, menopausal lifestyle, but I want our audience, our listeners, to get to know a bit about you outside of what I just shared. So, why don't you tell us some more about yourself?
Sure. So I've been a nonprofit executive for over 25 years, working in the social justice and human rights space. I'm currently the Senior Director of Strategy and Innovation with Cause Effective, which is a consulting firm that partners with nonprofit professionals in the areas of fundraising, communications, and board governance. And we provide coaching and strategic guidance and planning. We do donor research, facilitate workshops and trainings, and we also offer cohort programming through programs like Preparing the Next Generation, which is a program for professionals of color, those who in particular are interested in fundraising through a DEI lens. And we also have what's called Resource Development Institute in partnership with the New York Women's Foundation. We work with Prudential. We provide programs to their grantees as well. So we partner with a lot of institutions that provide support to nonprofits, and they bring us in to provide consulting and workshops and training. I also have my own clients through my firm, which is called Shields Consulting. So, I'm working with folks around executive coaching. Sometimes it's development and communication planning. Maybe they want to launch a marketing campaign. So I talk to a lot of nonprofit professionals all throughout the week.
Gotcha. So before we dive into the menopausal part of this discussion, I just want to say that I love that you do social justice work, and there is so much to learn from a social justice lens when it comes to menopause. And I'm excited about learning more and widening that conversation or getting involved in that conversation. So let's switch gears here for a bit and talk about your menopausal journey. When did you realize you were in the menopausal stage or the menopausal phase?
Hmm. I think it's important for me to sort of talk a little bit about what my 30s were like because My hormones were often out of whack in my 30s. In fact, my girlfriends and I at the time often talked about how we had only like one good week per month where we really felt like we were glowing and feeling like, really balanced and really good and sexy. We would joke about that all the time. Um, and it was the week after our menstrual cycle when we would feel really, really good and our energy was great and our skin was glowing. Um, and back then, we didn't have information on how to address the uncomfortableness. It consisted of like tension in the body, headaches from time to time, low energy, feeling emotional. And then when my 40s came, I started having heavy periods that progressively became worse and worse. And I found out that I had small fibroid tumors. And by the time I was 47, I had the uterine fibroid embolization procedure, which is not major surgery. Basically, it's blood supply to the fibroid tumors um, to block the blood flow and to shrink the tumors, to shrink the fibroids. They basically take like tiny particles and they inject it to stop the blood flow to the fibroids through a thin tube called like a catheter, which is inserted through like your blood vessel in your leg or your arm, leg or your wrist. And I remember them saying that it's not a major procedure, you're going to be fine. But when I came out of it, I was definitely in a lot of pain, and I was kind of out of it for a week. But ultimately, it did change my life because the doctor told me that the heavy periods would cease for at least 7 years. And by then I would be going into menopause. And that's exactly what happened. So I was able to live a more comfortable life for about 7 years. And then in my early 50s, I started having spotty periods. I just didn't know when my period would show up. Um, I started experiencing gaining, weight, and it became harder for me to keep the weight off. I specifically remember when I turned 50, I was in Paris. And I remember, just drinking wine and just enjoying the culture and the food. And I looked at myself in the mirror one evening. I was like, oh, 50 is the magic number. Like I could tell that my body was really shifting because I was just not having the bounce back that I once did. I could tell that the weight gain was real and that I was going to have to really make some fundamental shifts in how I was living. And so I decided to kind of take menopause on. I didn't want to suffer and be miserable, and I felt I needed to have more information to overcome the symptoms that I was experiencing. So I began researching everything basically about menopause. Like I learned things like hot foods and at certain times can make you have hot flashes. I discovered that red wine was making me have hot flashes, so I stopped with the red wine. I stopped with having so much sugar and eating badly. Not that I was really a bad eater, but I started to notice everything and really started paying attention to when I would have hot flashes, and definitely stress was a major factor as well. So I just tried to, just take it on and like learn as much as I needed to learn so that I could make the shifts in my life because I just did not want to be suffering, on a daily basis.
Wow. I hear so much of that from so many women. And that's the beauty of conversations and communication and community. And one of the reasons why I wanted to create this podcast, because like you mentioned, there is so much we don't know, and there aren't much conversations happening around menopause on so many different levels. So, what are some of the things that you wished you knew prior to going into menopause and having to go do your own
Hmm.
research, something that might have prepared you?
There's such a big question. I mean, first off, I definitely felt isolated. I remember that the only person I would talk about it with at the time was my hairstylist, because she had been doing women's hair, since she, was like 19, 18, 19 years old. So she watched many women go through it. So she was very comfortable talking about it. And so I remember she was sort of like my partner in crime around, tackling it. When I tried to talk to my mother about it, um, my grandmother passed when I was like 47. So it was just when I was starting to go through it. But when I would talk to my mother about it, my mother just always said that, she just didn't have symptoms that were that bad because she had a hysterectomy. But I remember when my mother had the hysterectomy, I remember how my mother was emotionally. I mean, I remember watching her just crying hysterically. And at the time, I was in my 20s and I was sitting there just baffled, like not knowing what was going on. And so we never ever really talked about it. It was only recently that, it's kind of come up in conversation, but she's continued to say that she just doesn't remember going through that much other than like night sweats. So I feel that as I approached, sort of my 30s, my idea of menopause was women will begin to act very crazy and be, emotionally uncontrollable. I would hear men in particular make references in such a negative way about women going through that, change in life. It was very derogatory. So I had a fear around it that I was just going to become like this lunatic, and I was also um, concerned that I was not going to want to have sex anymore. And so that was definitely a concern. So I remember as I approached menopause, when I knew that I was in menopause, going into menopause,
Right.
I part of my desire to kind of get a handle on it was because number one, I, did not want to be in meetings, on a regular basis where I was sweating, and running a meeting and I'm sweating in the middle of meetings. The uncomfortableness when I would be traveling, like on the subway in New York City, I hated that. I love clothes, and I'd be, layered and with my blazer, and my coat, and my scarf, and I'd hit the platform, and I'm like, oh, I got to pull this stuff off, like so that was very uncomfortable when going through that experience. And then I still wanted to have sex, and I was very concerned about that. So the narrative was a negative narrative. It was a negative that you're no longer going to be wanted. You're no longer fertile. You're getting older. And so that's, I think, the reason why women, just in general, don't talk about it. And age discrimination is real. And so there was a part of me that I remember, I had a fairly young team of people that I was supervising when I started having hot flashes. There was one woman who was older than me, one man that was older than me, but everyone else was like in their 20s and early 30s. And I'm sitting in a meeting having hot flashes, and it made me uncomfortable. It definitely made me uncomfortable for a time. So it's just so interesting that, here I am, 59 years old. This was not that long ago. And the lack of information about something that is so natural and it should not be something that we fear is really quite unbelievable when you really think about it.
Goodness, thank you so much for sharing all of that because yes to all of it. The fact is, there is a lot of information out there now, but there was not a lot of information out there prior to, I would say, what, maybe 10 years ago?
Just 10 years ago, like
Exactly.
literally just 10 years ago.
Mhm, mhm.
I had to take, no one was talking about this. Like no one was talking about it. It's so good to now see on social media conversations around it.
Exactly. I think what we truly need is safe communities for people to unpack, to release shame, to release stigmas, to release dogmas, and also share and support one another, which
Mm,
is what we're doing here.
mhm,
And I think once this happens, it is going to help people to release the narrative that's been passed down
mm.
and move forward in a healthy way, thrive, because that's what we want to do. We want to be able to thrive through all of this. Now, what was the best advice you've ever gotten about menopause?
I wish that I could tell you, Dixie, I've never gotten any advice about menopause. Never. I've never ever received any advice about menopause ever, ever. I've been the person who's given advice about menopause. I've never, I mean, like I said, I went on the internet and did the research. I learned, on my own about estrogen, which I started taking and really works. I learned, the importance of exercise. I learned the importance of, moderate, alcohol intake. I started taking supplements. No one gave me any advice. No one.
Wow. Just wow. Thank God all of that is changing. The spirit of menopause is changing. There seems to be a renaissance that's happening around it. And I welcome it because I'm in a position now where I can turn to people like you. And thank God, because you came before me. Here I am now. And I want to be a resource for those who are going to come after me. And of course, my peers, because there are still a lot of people who are silent, enclosed, experiencing menopause in a silo. And it is so
Mhm.
unhealthy. And I feel for these people, but I understand that it is the stigma and the taboos that's been attached to menopause that keeps them silent and keeps them suffering to some degree.
Well, can you imagine women who are going through it in their 30s and, much younger? Can you imagine how isolated they must feel?
Exactly. I'm so glad you brought that up because the reason why I say people going through menopause is because, well, first of all, the US has approximately 2 million women experiencing menopause annually and 6 million women experiencing menopause globally. Now, that does not include people who are in the non binary population. So we only have some figures, we don't have the real figures. People who experience menopause are not just in their 40s and 50s, like you said, they are younger in their 30s and 20s. So, where is the support for them? And the fact that you said that no one supported you, we know what our parents and our elders were taught, nothing. The fact that you had to go out there and do it yourself is what we don't want to continue to see happening. We want to navigate this in supportive, healthful communities.
Mhm. Well, I just think that in general, our society is not a society that teaches us about having optimal health. We have a society where you go to the doctor and they have been trained to prescribe a drug for whatever ailment you have. And when you start talking to them about, um, I mean, literally, literally anything that I have gone to the doctor for, and when I, start having conversations about how to attack an issue, it's always about an antibiotic. It's always about some kind of drug. And then I have to do my own research to figure out like how do I want to proceed because sometimes you don't necessarily need a drug, right? There's a lot of side effects to drugs. So, we don't live in a society where we're being taught about wellness. We're not, taught about diet in the best way. Um, and, you look at menopause in general and so many young women that I talk to because I have a lot of women in my life that are in their 20s and 30s, and when I'm talking to them they don't even understand the connection between mind, body, and spirit. They don't know anything about that. They just think that menopause is going to happen and it's just going to happen and there's nothing that they can do about it. But it has a lot to do with, your lifestyle, how you navigate it depends on what you're putting in your mouth every day. Are you eating whole foods? Are you exercising? How much do you drink? Do you do some form of kind of stillness, meditation? What's your level of stress in your life? It plays a major, major, major role, and especially if you do have some other kind of health issue and you take medications, those medications can also trigger hot flashes as well. And so women who are even in their 30s that start going through PMS and because to me that's what starts to set it off in my opinion. I feel like your 30s you're dealing with PMS and then as you go into your 40s I believe that your body starts going through hormonal changes and the more that you change your lifestyle to live a lifestyle that is as clean, as toxic free as possible, where you're getting your rest, you're exercising, you know, um, whole foods, not drinking a lot of alcohol and putting a lot of toxins in your body, you'll have a much better experience getting older. And that's just that's just the facts.
Such great advice. I think it's so very important for us to look at menopause from a holistic point of view. And you're right. A lot of the times we go to doctors and they simply want to treat symptoms. I have medical professionals in my family, and they'll tell me plain and frankly, we treat symptoms and that's it. And so sometimes we want to just kind of get to the core of like, what is happening? Can we get to the root of it so that we can deal with it and fix it so that we can be healthy from the inside out? Now, I want to go back to something that you talked about briefly earlier, but we're going to talk about it a little bit more. You mentioned not wanting to go to the board meetings because of your hot flashes and other symptoms that you might have been experiencing. What is it like? You are a busy professional. You are talking to people, meeting with people on a daily basis. What is it like navigating the workspace during the menopausal experience or journey?
Well, I'm so glad that I feel like I've overcome all of that, to be honest. Like, I can't remember now when's the last time I even had a hot flash at this point. I was trying to think, but I can't recall. Sometimes I do have night sweats. I'll wake up, really hot, but I can't recall a hot flash in a minute. But when it was happening, there was a period for maybe 6 months, where it was kind of like a regular thing where I just didn't know when it would happen. And I was kind of in denial at first because I just didn't understand like what was supposed to do. Um, and that's, as I said, I started doing the research. So certain things that I had to navigate at work was one, I had to wear less clothes. So I'm trying to be all cute and fashionable. I was like, okay, you cannot layer to this extent. You're not going to be able to wear that hat, that scarf. I'd be walking around with like a big Russian hat on, in the wintertime. It's like, no, girl, you're going to have to take that off. So like less clothes because your body has warmed up. Your body is now hotter. It's just the way it is. So I learned that. I started really paying attention to what I was eating during the day at work as well. And then I remember I used to have to really pay attention to my energy. So, what I would find is if I were getting sort of like pumped up about something, as my energy was sort of get pumped up, maybe I was stressing about something or worrying about something, like, I'm getting ramped up, I would notice that a potential hot flash would happen. So I started scanning my body, and like inner body awareness is what I call it, where, I'm just kind of going inside and kind of calming my body down. And that would really help me to manage my hot flashes at work. Because my work environment, most of my career has been pretty intense. And, I'd be in these meetings where it could get pretty intense. I work under a lot of deadlines. There's a lot of moving parts all the time. People would be in and out of my office. It was just like, it was off to the races from the moment I would walk in the door. So that kind of energy, for me to be able to navigate all of that, of course, I have to have high energy, and I'm a pretty high energy person. So, I just had to really pay attention to how I was kind of showing up every day and just kind of calm myself down. And it really worked. And then I had to become comfortable with talking about the fact that I was having a hot flash. I find that there are people who are uncomfortable with it. It's becoming better, but back then they were definitely uncomfortable. Young women, would look, at me with a little bit of fear, because they're, concerned about what they're going to experience. And men, they just would kind of just like have a blank look on their face and not know what to say. So being able to lean in and just talk about it in a way that was just natural. Was not easy at first, but I was like, I don't want people to sit here thinking like, why is Sonya breaking out into a sweat without acknowledging that it was happening? So that was my journey of, getting more and more comfortable with it. And of course, accepting the fact that I was getting older. It's interesting because I remember turning 40 and feeling like, wow, this is sexy as hell. I thought like that. I was thinking like, oh, it's just gonna, but I was like, 40 is pretty sexy. And then turning 50 and feeling like, wow, I feel still young. I feel great. But then when the menopause symptoms started happening, I was like, oh, okay. And it became real. It just became real. So I don't know many women that don't go through a period of a little bit of like loss, like, wow, I am getting older. And being able to accept that publicly, especially because you're managing people and you're around people, is a very interesting process to have to go through because, many people around you, um, as you know, are not comfortable with getting older. I literally have conversations with women who are in their early 30s talking about the fact that they're concerned about seeing lines and they want to be preventative and they want to get Botox and they're in their early 30s. So at the end of the day, it's always like a coming out in certain spaces to talk about it. My father just turned 80 last month, and we had this dinner with a bunch of friends and family. And one of my friends from growing up was there, and she's like 2 years older than I am. And she was having hot flashes all throughout the dinner. And we ended up having to have a conversation about it because she was fanning herself. And my god sister, who you met, Ariel, was sitting across from me. And I could see Ariel just kind of looking, because I think Ariel's like 31 or 32, just kind of looking. And then my mother, who's in her late 70s, like, so you have all these women of different ages, and my friend just really going through it. And then we started having a conversation. Everybody started talking about their different experiences with menopause, and it was great because everybody was being really transparent about it. But I could see Ariel's face like, I mean, I see how this is a huge benefit for her to have knowledge at her age about it, so she can get ahead of it. But nonetheless, I know that it's not something that, unfortunately, is comfortable for a lot of people. And so having to navigate that at work is really about, your level of confidence. And I just try to lean in and just be confident about it because it's a natural progression for any woman who's getting older.
I love that. Some key words I pulled out of what you just said: comfortable, acceptance, confidence, coming out. All of these are so very important as we navigate the menopausal journey, because at some point we get to tap into these ways of being to come out on the other side, which you obviously have done. You've come out on the other side because you can't even remember the last time you had a hot flash. So,
I know, right? And you know what I could, what, what's so glorious about all of it is that, am I the way that I used to be in my 20s and 30s? No, I'm not. No. But my energy level is great, and I've never lost my desire for sex. I never did. And I think that for so many women, they think that they will. And I do know some women that have, and I've had conversations with them just recently in the past couple of months. Two of my dear friends confided in me and told me that they've lost their desire for sex. And they were two women who are very sexual beings, and I talked to them about how they need to really get proactive about it, and recommended some supplements that I thought that would help, and certainly exercise and would help as well. But I just never went through that, and I'm so grateful about that. But again, it goes back to, as I said, you can take it on, and it's really about your lifestyle. And I think that the thing is that people don't realize that you actually have to do something in order to get older well. Like, even our brain function is not going to be the same way that it was when we were 25 and 30, right? Your brain gets older. and it's not sometimes as coherent, as it once was. You have brain fog. And so you have to actively do things to make sure that you have brain function, heart function, brain and heart cohesion, your energy level at a capacity so that you could be optimal every day. So like nothing is going to stay the same. We are going to get older. It's just how are we going to get older?
Love that. It's just how we're going to get older. And the fact that you said that the changes are going to happen regardless. How are we going to get older? It's a natural part of life, but we've been taught not to accept it. We've been taught that it's unnatural. So some are great at just saying, no, that's not me. I want to age well. And these are the things that I'm going to do. I'm going to become aware of what's going on with my body. I'm going to accept what's happening with my body. I'm going to take action with what's happening with my body. And they do. And then you have other women who are afraid.
Isn't that so interesting? I struggle with it. I don't quite understand it. It's almost like some women accept it. They are like, okay, I'm in menopause, but they think they don't realize that they can do something about it. And they're stuck. And I don't quite understand why do they just almost like they give up. They throw their hands up and they give up.
I think it's from more from habit. Really, like forever since people have existed, we've been told that menopause is not sexy. Menopause means that you're supposed to hang your hat up on the invisible shelf, back wherever that shelf is. I don't know. I don't ever want to know. And just fade into nothingness, right? But now you have people who are saying, no, we're not going to do that. We are going to live our lives. We are going to find ways to manage this rite of passage because guess what? Just like we have menopause, there is andropause, but nobody talks about that. And we're not going to talk about that either, right? We have our thing to deal with, but we're dealing with it differently than how we were taught we are supposed to deal or to manage it. And we're going to be the better for it. The generations coming up will be the better for it because they're going to be talking about it amongst themselves in the office. And I'm so glad that you talked about aging and accepting aging and pro aging and well aging. Again, all of that goes back to having these important conversations about aging. Because if people are not talking about aging and that it's okay to have wrinkles and it's okay to have sags and bags, nobody's going to want to be sagging and be bagging and aging well or any other way. There will always be rejection as opposed to acceptance. So it's important that we have these conversations. It's important that we have communities that are safe to have these conversations. And it's important that we are
I
bold
know.
and convicted about these conversations because nothing's going to change if we don't. Yeah, so hooray to you for taking action and for getting on this side of the experience where you are thriving. I know some women really have to go through that striving period because they have to find their rhythm and their flow in order to go in the direction that they need to. And sometimes for some people, it takes time. So let's move into something else I want to talk about, especially now that you have gotten to this point where you are. How do you sustain? How do you maintain your well being? Share with us three self care rituals that you currently use to support your well being.
Well, first of all, one of the things that I don't use the word aging. I always say that I'm getting older because, we are going to get older, but we don't have to age. That's one thing that I always, it's one of my mantras. It's like, I'm going to get older, but I don't have to age. Um, Meditation is a big part of my life at this point. I do transcendental meditation. I do a meditation that, is about being in the present moment, and I do an active meditation. So I meditate every day, every morning for an hour, and then I meditate late afternoon, early evening for another 20 minutes. And that's been life changing. And then exercise. I'm in the gym almost every day for an hour as well. And then I eat primarily a whole food diet as much as possible. A lot of salmon, avocado, berries, healthy nuts, lots of vegetables. Yeah, I mean, I don't eat red meat or pork. I'll eat some chicken here and there, some duck, lamb if I'm like out to eat, in a restaurant. I might have that if I see it on the menu. But yeah, a whole food diet, exercise, meditation, I would say, and just, mantras. I just live a very present life. I don't think a lot anymore about the past and stress myself out a lot. I just try to be as conscious and present as possible every day.
I love that. Would you attribute it to wisdom?
Well, I went through I think a spiritual awakening about 15 years ago, where I realized that I was living life, sort of on the outside. And I think I mentioned this to you, maybe, that I discovered the book written by Eckhart Tolle, A New Earth, you
Hmm.
know, and I
Yes.
started really listening to his teachings and stuff. And then I kind of went on a journey of personal growth. And I've been in that space now for a long time. So there's a lot of folks that, I really listen to. Listen to their audible books and their podcasts that are in the personal development space, a lot of spiritual leaders. And I've just gone through now over a decade of living a life that is as conscious as I possibly can be, present, um, and the overthinking, the need to just live a life where you're just literally having a relationship with your thoughts every single day is exhausting and very stressful, and that's just a life that I just don't want to live. So I'm very much about being really aware of my thoughts, and if I'm having negative thoughts, because that creates a certain energy in your body. It causes inflammation. Stress causes inflammation. So yeah, I mean, my day-to-day practice is one that is pretty positive most days. Even when something's going on within my family, I've learned now to not let challenges and disappointments overwhelm me to the point where it takes me down, and I am able to kind of have space around things, because, in most instances there's nothing that you can do about it. And if there's something that you can do about a situation, you take it on and you do something. But even in the doing and even in the action doesn't have to be stressful. So overall, I just try to live a life that is very conscious and present and positive, where I'm trying to manifest the goals that I've set for myself. And it makes life a lot more exhilarating versus, being stressed over things that you can't necessarily control, like things from the past, things that happen in your past, traumas of the past. It's like, I'm not trying to carry all of that with me every single day. And I'm very much about like being present and looking towards a really abundant future.
It sounds like you have clarity about how you want to exist in this world, and I love it.
I think that life is for me about evolving and pushing through fear, um, and challenging myself to, just show up every day and really from a place of gratitude, because it just time is just moving so fast, and I'm just so grateful that, I have my breath, that I wake up every single day. And I just want each day to be um, joyful as much as possible. So, um, I don't know. It's been a process. It's a day-to-day process. It's a lifelong journey. I think that, I'm not all of a sudden going to ever one day just be like this completely Zen person who just doesn't have any kind of negative reactions to things that happen in life. I just recognize that it's a part of the work. And to me, the opposite of doing this work is just to kind of have this, constant life of, being in my head, anxiety, fear, stress, comparing my life to someone else, causing dramas. Most people just are having relationships with their thoughts and just causing all kind of dramas that usually never even happen. So I just I've lived that way, and I've put that way of living in the past.
I love it. And all of those can exacerbate the menopausal symptoms, which we don't want. So,
Mhm.
yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
Mhm.
If you were a doctor, what would you want your patients to know about menopause and why?
I would just say that it's really important to get your hormonal levels checked every year. Um, that's I remember when I don't know, I read that somewhere. All I know is I went to get my annual checkup and I asked for it. It wasn't like the doctor told me that I should have my blood levels, to have it checked. I asked for it. And every year now I ask for it. I want to see how I'm doing. And that's been really, really helpful to me. Um, I think again that women have a tendency to feel, out of whack, not balanced, and sometimes it has to do with your thyroid. You have to pay attention to those things. So, having your levels checked every year, I think, is critical. That's really, really important. And doctors don't often tell you to do that, so you have to ask for it.
I do the same with my doctor. And there are doctors who've said, well, why do you need that? I have one specific
I
friend.
know,
Yes.
right?
Could you believe? She's one specific friend, her doctor said to her, well, that's not going to make a difference. Like, what do you need that for? And so my thing is, we want to have great relationships with our healthcare partners and healthcare providers. So, knowing our hormonal levels helps us to track how we feel. It's not that we're saying, oh, I can do something about it. You can if you want to. Some people choose not to, but just knowing that, hey, this is where my levels are this year compared to where it was last year. Okay, let me talk to my provider about what's happening, what's going on, why is this change occurring, and what can I do? Is there a need to do anything? Just knowing, just being in awareness helps. Yeah. So I love that you do that. I think it's so important.
Yeah, if you're not feeling sexual, if your sex drives has gone away, and then you get your hormonal levels checked, that could tell you what's happening. What you might need to do to change that. So it's very, very important. And I think it gives you information about some of the lifestyle changes that you might need to make, or maybe supplements that you might need to take, because there might be some certain things that your body needs that is being deprived, and you might need to be feeding your body in a certain way.
Well, that was certainly insightful. I know there's so much more we can talk about, but you've provided us with so much information about the changes that you went through, the journey that you went through, and the fact that you are living proof that it does not last forever. Because I know that's the fear for so many people that this is never going to stop. It's going to
Mm-mm.
last forever. It's not going to last forever. And I really am thankful and grateful for you for coming on and sharing your journey, your menopausal journey with us.
I am so grateful to you and all that you're doing, and as I said, it was my pleasure to talk to you today, always.
There you have it. Thank you so much to my dear friend Sonya Shields for coming on and sharing her journey, her experience. I wanted our first interview to be someone who has been through the experience, who is currently going through the postmenopausal experience. I wanted people to identify with someone who's actually going through what they are so that you hear for yourselves you're not alone. Do like and subscribe to our podcast. You can find it on all platforms that stream podcasts. So, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Audible, and there will be some others that I will leave links to on the blog. So, visit us at thepausepod.com. And also, I have a private Facebook group, the Pause Pod Podcast. If you would like to be a member of the community, just go on Facebook, look for us at the Pause Pod, and request to join, or you can send an email to us. Also, don't forget to sign up for our email. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you on the next podcast. Let's perimenopause and prosper.